All right, in this video, I'm going to talk about why I think learning anatomy is a waste of time for most of you, or at least seriously overrated. Let me frame that a little bit. This video is particularly aimed at a subset of artists, particularly those of you that want to learn to draw from imagination. That also means a lot of you that want to get into concept art, because that's essentially designing from imagination or creating imaginary work. That's who I'm gearing this video towards, although fine artists could benefit from this as well. Now, the reason I say this is I've been a concept artist in the gaming and film industry for over 8 years. I've done it professionally, and I know that I haven't learned anatomy that much. Don't get me wrong, I'm interested in anatomy because my physical training background, and I like anatomy. I like to know anatomy, but I use it more to show off to a doctor than I actually use it in my art. So the reason I say this is because when you go to an art school, a lot of the times they will show you this sort of funnel. I don't even know if they show this, by the way, but at least, like, let's say they're half decent. They show you like mannequinization, and then they're like, well, and then we'll learn anatomy, and then you get to design your own stuff. In essence, wrong. This is not something we want to attain. Now, the reason I say this is, and don't get me wrong, because this comes from our anatomy course, all right? We have an anatomy course. We're going to actually kill that course, and we're going to do it completely different in our roadmaps. A lot of the times people want this, okay? And this is, I think, where I feel as a teacher, we're doing them a disservice, because learning anatomy can be a big problem in your development as an artist, specifically, again, for those of you that want to become concept artists or draw from imagination. And I mean, when we go to history, all of the artists that came before us that we look up to in terms of imaginary drawing from imagination, comic artists, animators, a lot of them didn't go through an extensive amount of anatomy. And if they did, they had a lot of reference just for that specific anatomy. But all in all, especially comic artists, when they wanted to draw from imagination, I specifically remember a video with Jim Lee and Stan Lee, I think, where Stan asks how Jim learned how to build the figure. And he was basically talking about football shapes for anatomy. Like, he didn't know any of the wording of anatomy or anything like that. He just like sort of learned the shapes. And that's the exact premise of this video, by the way. So if you want to stop watching, that's it. Learn shapes, right? That easy. So drive home my point is that they do not focus or hyper-focus on anatomy. And I feel like a lot of institutions and a lot of online schools tend to have you hyper-focus on anatomy so that, one, you are confused by complexity, because anatomy is very complex. So it kind of retains you longer, and it sort of creates this education limbo where you think that because you're spending the 1,000th hour on anatomy studies, you're somehow doing good stuff, okay? And again, I'm focusing here on people that want to draw from imagination. But if you're hyper-focusing on something that is essentially a lifelong pursuit of understanding, which is anatomy, you're always just going to be stuck in that limbo of trying to perfect learning the muscles, trying to perfect understanding the names of the muscles, trying to perfect knowing everything about how the muscles intersect and their tendons and all of that. And you can spend a lifetime doing that, right? There's people that do that. It's not necessarily going to make you a better artist. Now, before you do anything else, make sure that you click the link in the description and get our free ebook. This book is absolutely fantastic. It gives you an insight into primarily what you'll be learning in our Artwod beginner road and applying, and it will give you these aha moments into how we at Artwod make you intuitive at perspective, and how we really help you better to draw from imagination in a very approachable manner, especially our staple unique approach to form manipulation that you won't learn anywhere else, on how to really look at form, how to be able to manipulate form that then turns into actual believable things that you can draw from imagination. We sort of want to unveil some of the secrets we have at Artwod on how to better get people into learning to draw from imagination. That's what this book is for. That will naturally kind of give you a hunger to do more, as it should, because drawing is awesome, especially when you can do it from imagination. Click the link in the description, get this book. It's truly awesome, and it's free. The good news is that there's a fix for this, right? What you simply do is you focus more on shapes. You bring it back to form, right? I'm the form guy. I always talk about form. If you guys want to play a drinking game, then take a shot every time I say form, because I will be saying it a lot. But essentially what we do at Artwod is focus on form. Why is form more important? Well, because form creates the illusion of complexity. Form, when we understand it in its simplicity, we can then use anatomy-informed shapes, right? So we give you those anatomy-informed shapes. You can then use those, start combining those by learning how to combine form, and that creates the illusion of anatomy. That's what we're doing here, creating illusions. When you understand that as an artist, you're basically an illusionist, everything becomes easier to do and everything becomes easier to learn as well. We're basically just doing a magic trick, and we're doing a magic trick with shapes, and we're using shapes to our advantage to create the illusion of anatomy. Just like animators create the illusion of life through animation, they simplify the movements that we do as humans, and they simplify it and they create the illusion. They simplify it or they exaggerate it, and they create an illusion of life. That's the beautiful thing about animation. We create this illusion. We understand form, and through form, through the steps of form, we create the illusion of anatomy. And I feel like this is crucially important for students to understand, because if you start hyper-focusing on just learning anatomy and you spend 2/3 of your time, because somewhere someone said that anatomy and perspective and composition are the 3 fundamentals of art, and you spend an ungodly amount of time on anatomy, but you're not improving in your goal, which is drawing your own characters from imagination or making your comic book, it's exactly because you're stuck in education limbo. I want to move you forward, right? I want the thing that drives progression is actually learning a core piece of information that's actually useful, and then repeating that, failing with that, and then learning what you failed at, trying to understand that, and then moving on. And you can do that much better with just understanding form manipulation, shapes and perspective, intuitive perspective, and rinse and repeat that. And that will make you much better at drawing from imagination. You can see it here as well, right? If I have like this werewolf that I drawn for one of our Artwod workouts, I don't rely on anatomy here at all. What I rely on is the way that I learned to break down the shapes of a wolf's head. You know, very specifically in my case, it's sort of this triangulated box with then these pointy ears. So that for me is a much better understanding of how to now create this from imagination. And the arms is that what we saw back here is that arm is basically I'm taking this arm, but I'm exaggerating these shapes. So for Artwod, that is what we call shape manipulation as well. We're inflating the form, where like you can literally see where I have the form line still, where we are inflating that form. We are pinching the form. We are bending the form. We are manipulating the form in as many ways as we understand based on our level of understanding of, of these form, of the mannequinization. And based on that, I can start building my mannequin for my werewolf. And then it's basically just adding icing on top with some detailing, some coloring, etc., etc. When it comes to fine art, we do want to understand anatomy just a little bit more. Why? Because fine art is usually not necessarily very imaginative work. It's usually painting from life. It's shedding a light on life in a unique manner that the artist sees it. That's at least how I see fine art. Whether it's with portraiture or landscapes or figurative or still life, these people bring the aspect of real life into a more artistic vision. What they do is they look at reference, right? This was drawn from reference, and it would be incredibly hard to do this from imagination. So I'm not going to spend an ungodly amount of time on learning anatomy to do this from imagination. It would be very impressive, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't serve my purpose of storytelling or concept art. When I look at reference, the added benefit that I have of understanding anatomy is that when I see some kind of weird bump on his rib cage, that I can think of like, oh yeah, that's probably the serratus that goes there, that is inserting into the obliques, and I understand this form now, so I can more confidently put shadows and light and form indication in there. So it's more about an understanding of the subject matter underneath, which is fine. That's good, right? It's the same when you draw a car from reference. The other day, I drew a motorcycle from reference, and it was very, very hard because I understood all of the simple forms that go into it, so I could fairly decently replicate it. However, if I understood all of the intrinsic detail about a motorcycle, how an engine worked, how the steering sort of worked, right, how the brakes worked, how they fit together, I would have been more confident in depicting that motorcycle, obviously. But for me to draw motorcycles from imagination, that reference and the shapes in my head is all I needed to then draw that motorcycle convincingly in different angles from imagination. And so this is where I'm trying to get to, is your focus on form, intuitive perspective, and form manipulation will be much better served than spending too much time focusing on anatomy. Now, another example of when anatomy becomes useful is when we want to add more deep design thinking. And in this case, or at least the way I see it, is when we want to add a lot more believable functionalities to something. So when we do something like mechanical design or sci-fi design, I mean, even here, like actually this is a bad example. This is not functional. It's just believable because I'm drawing anatomically like shapes, but it's still focused on my understanding of shape design and how a mannequin actually looks relatively anatomically believable. So it's not necessarily functional, although it has the appearance of functionality because I slapped anatomy-informed shapes on top. However, when it comes to like mechanical design, it can sometimes be very beneficial to understand anatomy, specifically into how muscles insert or where they have like levers, right? What's the functionality of anatomy? Why is my bicep attached to my radius or ulna to lever it upwards, right? Why is it triceps? Why is it attached there? Where are the tendons attached? Because when I know that, I can translate that into something anatomical where I use hydraulic pumps instead of tendons to create the same illusion. And so where anatomy becomes very useful then is I don't have to invent functionality. I can just base functionality on anatomy that already has done it for me. So I don't have to invent anything. And this is where you sort of create leverage for your design thinking. You're basing something in real life, or you're basing a design on something that already exists in real life, and you're just almost borrowing its functionality and putting it into your design. And then it becomes useful. But overall, when I'm drawing things like this, right? When I'm drawing a comic or storytelling and I have figures, I'm not focused on anatomy at all. Like at all. All I'm doing here is I'm just thinking about shapes. I'm only thinking about what is the mannequin version of what I've drawn here. And that's also how I start. Like I will start very scribbly. So I will start with like literally something like this. Like I can start like super scribbly because I can always bring it back anyway. So when I ideate my characters, I'm usually just scribbling. But underneath, I am really considering the mannequin. I'm considering the shapes, and in this case, just like the simple cylinder going into the manipulated cylinder for the arm. And even when it comes to the clothes, by the way, all I'm thinking about is the shapes itself. I'm not really considering it to be clothing. For me, it's just simple manipulated forms, like an inflated cylinder for this sleeve. That's all I'm thinking about. So for me, the forms are much more important to understand and learn and be intuitive with them in space, because this perspective doesn't work at all in real life. Like you couldn't replicate this in 3D, I think, but I can make it look believable because I have an intuitive sense of perspective. So if you were to focus on anything like in more depth, I would focus a lot more on animation. So form, you heard me say a lot, right? If you've played the drunken game now, you'd be drunk out of your mind right now. But you focus on form, and then if you want to focus on something extra, I would seriously recommend animation. If you want to bring your characters to life, if you want to draw characters from imagination, but even if you want to draw objects from imagination, focusing on animation, that is such an underdeveloped skill that you can really work on. It's also going to take a lot of time, but there's like little steps in animation that you can do that can already help propel your art forward. The magic of animation is bringing the illusion of life to an inanimate object. That's why in animation, you learn to start animating a flower bag, right? The flower bag is an inanimate object. It's amorphous almost. And you bring it to life through the guides of the rules of animation. And because of that, you create a very interesting object. But if you were to like apply anatomy onto that flower bag, it doesn't become more believable, or it doesn't become more human-like. It just becomes rigid and maybe very detailed, but that's not what you want. You want to bring your art to life if you want to draw characters from imagination. And so that flower bag, when you create a mannequin, right, that consists out of cylinders and boxes, it's basically the same as that flower bag. It's an inanimate object that you've now created, a mannequin, and you start animating that mannequin, and then you create the illusion of life. You create the illusion of storytelling. And that's what you should be doing. So instead of really focusing on anatomy, you should just focus on creating a believable mannequin structure that you can understand and manipulate in space. And when you can do that and you can animate that, then you create the illusion of life, and you create a lot more interest in your drawings and paintings from imagination, right? For storytelling. Again, this video was specifically aimed for people that want to draw from imagination, that want to bring stories to life, whether that's simple objects or comics or even illustrations. A hyper focus on anatomy, which you can spend a lifetime on and not really move forward that much in improving your art, for me, is a waste of time. You could much better focus on thoroughly understanding form, how to intuitively draw that form in space, learn how to animate that, and then through other fundamentals like composition and design, and shape language, you can build beautiful art without the need of really understanding anatomy. And that's all I had to say about that. So again, as always, happy learning and happy drawing.